Hi, and thank you very much for coming to this session. Before introducing our four guests, I'd like to make 3 points to give you a little bit of context very quickly. First, one thing to realize is that ocean tech is very high tech. All the technologies you talked about today are being applied and used and need to be, because that's how we're going to bring sustainability and economic development together. Second, strangely enough, Atlantic Canada has a huge ecosystem of universities, schools, businesses, defense installations that is at the same size as Boston and the better-known San Diego area, to give you a sense of how dynamic it is, and a growing hub happening on the West Coast in BC. The third one is that there are a lot of companies involved, and 60% of Canada's ocean industries are based in Atlantic Canada and growing. So with that, I'm going to introduce our good panel. Kendra Mcdonald is the Chief Executive Officer of the Ocean Supercluster. She was a partner and the Chief Auditor for Deloitte, and she's on the board of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and of Technology NL. At the far end is Chris Huskilson. Chris is an investor and promoter of ocean tech companies, but he also was the CEO of Emera and Nesnes Power through his long and distinguished career. We also have Donald Grant. Donald was a lawyer that worked in law, then for the Nova Scotia government in a number of capacities, and has since left and is working on the Ocean Startup project in Canada. And finally, on our screen is Ali Dragonet. She is the founder since 2017 of Seagoing Green. She was one of Forbes 30 out of under 30 leaders, and has also been an author in island development, ocean acidification, and genetic diversity. So with that, I'm going to start and give our panelists a chance to give you a sense. I'm going to start with Kendra, because what is happening with the supercluster is a very important movement. Kendra, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you. It's great to have the opportunity to be here today. We heard a little bit in the introduction, but Canada has the longest coastline in the world. We have the 4th largest ocean territory. And yet, most Canadians probably wouldn't identify themselves as a maritime nation. And our ocean economy is a pretty small contributor to our overall Canadian GDP. So when we look at what's happening globally, this conversation is heating up. The blue economy is getting a lot more attention. And on a couple sides. One, in terms of the economic opportunities. So the OECD projects that the ocean economy globally is going to double in size by 2030. So that's a $3 trillion US dollar opportunity by 2030. It's also projected to outpace the growth of the broader global economy. So when we're thinking about where are the opportunities for economic recovery, that sounds like a pretty good one. At the same time, our oceans are under tremendous pressure, right? Whether we heard overfishing, pollution, ocean acidification, rising sea levels. For us here in Canada, how quickly the Arctic is melting. And so it is really crucial to the climate change conversation and really not well understood. So we've seen ocean really taking a bigger part of the conversation at COP26 over the last couple of weeks. And it plays a key role in carbon absorption. 70% of the planet actually absorbs more carbon than the rainforest, and we have the largest carbon sink in the North Atlantic. But its ability to absorb carbon is reducing, and if we don't get a good handle on that, then as we set our net zero targets, it could significantly impact our ability to be able to reach those targets. So it's a really important part of the climate change conversation. So when we talk about the ocean economy, the reason we talk about the sustainable blue economy is because we need to have health and wealth as part of the same conversation. It's an economic opportunity, but a healthier ocean is a more productive ocean, and so we cannot be developing solutions that help the economy but further hurt the ocean. So from a supercluster perspective, so some of you may have heard earlier, NGen was speaking, so they are one of the other superclusters in Ontario. We are based out of Atlantic Canada, but we have projects across the country, and we are seeing a combination of projects really focused on making our Canadian ocean economy more digital, more sustainable, and more inclusive. We are cross-sectoral, so we have over 400 members across fisheries and aquaculture and offshore resources and bioresources and shipping, ocean technology, working together to be able to reduce the cost and reduce the risk of doing business in the ocean, as well as looking at the workforce of the future. We have projects across the country. Some examples of those, we've got an electrification project looking at battery storage in BC. We've got an alternative fuels project looking at being able to reduce the diesel content, increase the water content to be able to reduce emissions out of Alberta. You may not expect to find an ocean project led out of Alberta. Project in Ontario looking at smart grids and reducing rural communities' reliance on diesel. We've got hybrid propulsion systems in Newfoundland, and in Nova Scotia, a project that's taking output from oil and gas, methane out of oil and gas, to create sustainable aquaculture feed in the aquaculture sector. So I'll stop there. That gives you a little flavor for what we're seeing.
So I'll give you an investor's approach to this. Chris, you've been very active in that field and been using your own money and others. Why don't you tell us your story and why you think it's great?
Okay. Well, thanks, Francis. And also I want to thank Kendra for what she's doing in the Ocean Supercluster. In fact, the Ocean Supercluster has really, I think, energized the economy in Atlantic Canada in a way that it hasn't been in the past. So what I thought I would do today is just give you a little bit of a sense of a couple of the projects that we have on the go and how those projects actually factor into the overall system. So first of all, I'm going to use two terms. One is AUV, and that's autonomous underwater vehicles. And the second term I'm going to use is USV, which is uncrewed surface vessels. Those two terms actually really highlight some of the significant activity that's happening these days. So the first project I would talk about is one that's actually working to improve the capture fishery. Now, there are lots of opinions about the capture fishery, but two of the biggest challenges that exist in that fishery today are first and foremost bycatch. And so, in fact, when you go out fishing, often you catch things you don't want to catch. And in fact, sometimes you don't even have a quota for that. And so if we can do something about bycatch, that makes a big difference to the fishery. Secondly, the nets that they use, they contact the floor of the ocean often. And when it does that, it actually can disturb the habitat, and it can also release CO2 from that ocean floor. And then lastly, as well, when you're out fishing, you actually spend a lot of fuel, which produces CO2. So the project is actually taking USV, an uncrewed surface vessel, and it's actually solving the problems that exist by using that USV to first and foremost locate fish and to characterize the fish that it's locating. It does that at a net zero carbon footprint. Then it also uses the USV to scout on behalf of the fishing vessel and ensure that it can fly its net above the ocean floor and therefore have less disturbance in the ocean floor. And then lastly, actually ensuring that we actually find the right fish and catch the fish we're after, as opposed to bycatch. So when we put those things together, it's using technology, data collection, artificial intelligence, and tremendous amount of robotics in order to do this. So that type of an investment uses existing technologies but applies them to an existing fishery. The second project that I would talk about is using a surface vessel to actually manage a UAV. And so today, if you actually take an AUV out in the ocean, you usually use a very large crewed vessel to do that. In this case, we're using a USV as a platform to actually manage that AUV, and therefore reducing the carbon footprint of that AUV dramatically. And so all of a sudden now we can map the ocean at a much lower cost, at a much lower CO2 contribution, and also just plain reducing the amount of effort. So what we end up doing is having a whole lot less exposure from a safety perspective for people on the ocean. We have a whole lot more economic way to map the oceans, which is something that we all need to do. And lastly, we actually have the ability to reduce the amount of carbon that is emitted in order to do that. So with that, Francis?
There's an excellent example of how technology is being applied. And these are all new things that are happening as we speak and as we go forward. Donald, you're involved in all the startups and bringing that together. Give us a sense of what's happening in that world.
Yeah. So it's fun for me to follow Chris, because what X-Ocean is doing is what we're trying to model for so many different new entrepreneurs here in Canada. And the Ocean Startup Project is a collaboration between 6 Atlantic Canadian organizations, along with ACOA and Canada's Ocean Supercluster. And what we're trying to do is make Canada the best place in the world to start, foster, and grow an ocean company. And I know there's probably a lot of you listening at home in your home nations saying, well, we're the best at oceans. We're the best at startups in the ocean sector. We want to have a bold vision here. We think we can become the best place in the world to do this. And we're doing that by doing 3 different things. What we're doing is we're inspiring, then we're initiating, and we're investing. And it's a continuum that we're working on. And we spend a lot of time in Canada right now talking about this massive opportunity in the ocean sector. And Ocean Supercluster is working on this. Companies like X-Ocean, ACOA, we're all collaborating to work to make this the best nation in the world to start, foster, and grow an ocean company, and just to have a really robust ocean sector and take advantage of this opportunity. And so a couple of the projects that we're doing are things like Lab to Market Oceans. And what that's about is taking all of this great research that's being done in universities across Canada in ocean programs and getting those researchers some entrepreneurial skills so they move to commercialize that research. It's a really, really important part of this startup community and this startup continuum. Then we have another project that is a graduation from Lab to Market, but it's open to anybody in Canada who wants to start a company in the ocean sector. It's called the Ocean Startup Challenge. What we do there is we provide them with some funding if they're a successful applicant. Then we put some programming around them. And then we call on people like Chris Huskelson and Kendra Mcdonald and Francis McGuire and say, we need you to come in and mentor these companies so that they get on a really solid footing very, very early on. And then what we have is CDL, which is Creative Destruction Lab, and it's an international program, but we have CDL Oceans out of Atlantic Canada. And what it does is it's about massive scalability and really high-end mentorship. And so what we're trying to do is drive companies into CDL. Now, CDL is open to anyone across the world to come and be part of. But as you get into that program, what you get is incredible mentorship and potential angel investment at the end of it. And so there's a whole lot of building blocks that we're putting in place to try and become the best place in the world to start, foster, and grow an ocean company. Finance is one component, programming is another component, and then I think we have some of the best mentors in the world in the ocean space here.
Ali, you're in the active economy. We've seen since COVID things growing. People want to get outside, get close to nature. Obviously, this has got to be done in a sustainable way. What are you seeing, one, in your world? And what is happening on that matching economic development and opportunity and sustainability together?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that great introduction. I'm really inspired to hear what the panel is doing. I'm Ali Dragosset. I'm the founder and CEO of Seagoing Green. We're a sustainable tourism consultancy based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And our big mission is really to alleviate the negative impacts of the tourism industry on the marine environment by working with both the private and public sector. I myself am a marine and freshwater biologist who used to work in the tourism industry. And I'm actually Canadian. I grew up in Toronto and I did my undergrad at U of T. So I really wish I could be there in person. And with the private sector, we really work directly with the marine tourism companies, such as river cruises, yachting companies, and hotels, where we start by measuring their carbon footprints so we can really see where their biggest negative impacts are. And then we can actually make sustainability strategies for how they can lower that. And with the public sector, we work really at the destination level, mainly on small island developing states, and develop sustainable tourism strategies from a destination level with development agencies to really boost tourism development in the right direction. And now I really wanted to give a small introduction on how tourism and the blue economy can really go together. So did you know that 80% of tourism takes place in coastal areas? Meaning that coastal areas are really the most impacted by both the positive and negatives of their area's reliance on tourism. If managed properly, tourism as an industry has the potential to be a massively impactful driver for blue economy. Science-based and data-based solutions will lessen environmental degradation while empowering communities and businesses. The sustainable growth of the blue economy is crucial as the ocean and its resources support 1 in 10 jobs worldwide and contribute to over $500 million per year. And in fact, coastal and marine tourism is projected to be the largest value-adding segment of the ocean economy by 2030 at an estimated 26%. But the benefits alone go far beyond job creation. Marine and coastal tourism can be an engagement tool for youth education and cultural exchange, as well as a way to really bring tourists closer to the conservation of the marine environment itself, which is what we do a lot of. So I want to take mangroves, for example. Mangroves are a nature-based solution to coastal areas' biggest challenges, such as beach erosion, rising tides, carbon emissions, and they're also crucial for the environmental and economic health of at-risk areas. For a tourism-reliant state like Florida, for example, it actually contributes to $1 billion of the statewide GDP, and mangroves are a lifeline for the surrounding waters and coastal communities. The IUCN estimates that half of the world's mangroves have been destroyed or cleared away, and I really think this is a huge missed opportunity for cost-effective solutions and the blue economy growth across over 3,000 kilometers of the Caribbean coastline. But how can tourism and sustainable tourism development really contribute to conservation for our oceans and therefore the blue economy? The first priority in sustainable marine tourism is really to alleviate any harm to the ecosystems. Tourism businesses and stakeholders should analyze their operations to understand any possible pollution, environmental degradation, or cultural impacts that may result from their operations. Once all the possible active harm is mitigated, that's really where the future of tourism can begin. I'll stop there for my introduction for now and looking forward to the discussion.
That's great. I'll come back to some of the community development elements. But Kendra, one thing that's people, as you set up things, two of the big groups that you work with are fisheries companies, and the other big group is offshore oil. You wouldn't think those people would find common ground, but they have. Could you talk about what is the common ground and what is the digital world there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the supercluster overall is really trying to change culture. So that's pan-Canadian culture, that's pan-Atlantic culture, and that's cross-sectoral culture. So until the supercluster, having fisheries executives and oil and gas executives trying to have one conversation about the future of the ocean economy, I won't say it never happened, but it would have been very rare, and putting them in the room for the first time was very interesting. But we really recognize that there are shared challenges across sectors, and that's what the supercluster was built on, and that's what makes it different than previous investments in developing the ocean economy for Canada. And so a few of those are certainly, and we heard Chris talk about it, reducing the cost and risk of being on the ocean. So big infrastructure costs in terms of communication, and so to be able to do that, you need technology solutions. So autonomous vehicles, sensor technology, data and AI, and making digital twins, more remote operations, all of those different types of solutions to be able to get the number of people off of the water and also to be able to reduce the cost of ocean activity. Another big one was just connectivity. So connectivity across the country, just knowing what we know and really connecting. So one of the advantages of the pandemic, although it was very hard on ocean sectors, was just it did increase connection across coasts for us to better learn from each other. International reach. So the ocean economy is quite export driven compared to the bulk of the Canadian economy. So always looking for both foreign direct investment as well as new markets. So that is something that the sectors have in common. And the other one is workforce development. So these are traditional sectors with very traditional workforces, and they are really struggling to be able to get people, whether that is social license issues, whether that's just the nature of types of jobs in terms of being on the ocean or fish processing, for example. And so a lot of those are changing in terms of being automated, in terms of new solutions. And so there's a lot of work to be done just raising awareness around what an ocean job looks like today and what the opportunities are in the future.
On that,
I was just going to pick up on that, Francis, because I really do think that if you take USV as an example, it's a perfect example of how there's cross-sectoral activity. So a USV can go out one day and do a survey for an oil and gas company and make sure that their pipeline is safe and secure. The next day it can go out and assist a fishing vessel to ensure that it's doing less damage and burning less fuel out doing the job that it's trying to do. And so that same technology, which is really the application of artificial intelligence, data processing, and robotics, which are all the same things that you actually apply on land, now applied properly to the ocean and sharing the risk, as Kendra said earlier, about actually making that application happen.
Actually, can I jump in on
sure.
that too?
Yes.
Yeah, because
Ali, you're going to have to do it too.
And just from a startup perspective, I think what I have found, and Chris and Kendra can tell me if I'm wrong on this, but what I've also found is innovation is certainly a common theme across all of these companies. But the larger multinationals, what I've found, don't do innovation particularly well from within. And so that's where you need an X-Ocean to come and bring a solution to a large multinational company. And that's where there's a huge opportunity for new startups in this country and across the world to bring that innovation to these large multinational companies.
Chris, I'm going to ask you to talk about participation of women in the labor force and what's happening because of technology. Then I'm going to ask you, Donald, who are the kind of young people and why do they get involved in this? And then I'm going to go to Ailey saying, well, who are the people, I expect more young than old, that are getting into this and driving that thought? So yours first.
Sure. Well, I think what's interesting is if you look at people who actually work on the ocean, so seafaring activities, only about 3% of those people today are female. And in fact, it's not a profession that women get involved in. Whereas when you think about it from an autonomous or from an uncrewed perspective, most of that activity begins to happen on land. And so now, all of a sudden, the number of women that actually are working in this industry is going up dramatically very quickly. And so, for instance, Don talked about the X-Ocean as a company. We've gone from having only 3% of the workforce being female to now being something in the order of 25%. And that's just a beginning. The reality is that this is a much more inclusive activity than it was in the past.
And it's a very high tech one. Donald, who are these people starting these businesses? What do they look like?
Yeah, it's a really mixed bag. And what's really encouraging is what we're seeing so much of is entrepreneurs who are coming out and wanting to start companies, but doing it in a twofold way. Absolutely want to generate revenue and build big companies, but they also want to make an impact. And what I have come to term as sort of an ambitious authenticity. So they want to make this money, but they want to stay authentic and make an impact on the environment, on the climate, on the planet. And so we're seeing a lot of different people from very different backgrounds and subsets coming forward. We have a lot of women entrepreneurs who are starting companies. We need more. There's absolutely way more work we need to do in that area. We have some Indigenous founders in our cohort, which we're really encouraged by. So we're seeing a really interesting group of people coming forward who want to make that impact and build big companies.
Ali, this is why are you in this business and who else is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think young people are really realizing their purchasing power. They're really the new conscious consumer. They're really expecting impact and sustainability to be really the status quo, as the panelists just spoke about as well. And they also expect this in their products and services. So I think, it's something like 83% of Generation Z and millennials will pay more for sustainable products and services. And they expect the companies that they choose to work with or buy from to actually already be doing something for sustainability. So of course, also the businesses that they're working in as employees or starting new businesses also need to be purpose driven. So I think it's a really exciting time for the entrepreneurs in this space.
So let me ask you something that's perplexed me. 5 years ago, nobody in Canada talked about oceans. It was ignored and probably wasn't as progressive as it is today. Why do you think that is? And will it change? So Kendra? Because if it doesn't, it's your fault.
It's all good. I think part of it is awareness. Like, I grew up in Ontario, and so we are near freshwater. We don't necessarily think about ocean. And when I thought about ocean, it was visiting my grandmother in Chester, Nova Scotia. And I really didn't think about it in terms of an economic opportunity. It was sort of a leisure opportunity. And so, we we talk about Norway, because Norway has a very strong ocean economy. 80% of their people, their population, lives on the coast. And so they wake up every morning and they think about ocean and they think about ocean solutions. We are the opposite. Only about 20% of our population is along the coast. A lot of our coastline is in the Arctic, which is not heavily populated. And so we have a lot of work to do to raise awareness around the ocean opportunity, what it means for Canada. And we just need to keep on telling that story. I am very surprised now being in this sector just how few Canadians know the importance of oceans. So we just need to keep telling the story, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, so I think there's always been a lot of activity in the ocean in Atlantic Canada. The difference is that originally that was mostly academic based. So there was a lot of study work, a lot of understanding of the ocean was going on, but not a lot of business. And sure, the fishery always existed and so on, but the reality was that people weren't thinking about, as Don just said, developing businesses that are primarily associated with the ocean, and now they are. And so I think the whole idea that innovation and application of high-tech activities can happen in the ocean has really energized a whole generation, and it's energized at least all of Atlantic Canada. And so I think it's really just taking what's been learned from the academic work that's gone on over time and applying that to business and thinking about it on a global stage. That's the other thing about Atlantic Canada is we've always thought in a very, very small scale. Whereas today we're thinking about having an impact on global activities. And that's something we can do in the ocean. It's something that the ocean provides us the opportunity to do. And if you can do it anywhere, you can do it in Atlantic Canada, and we're proving that.
And you're selling all your products all over the world.
All over the world.
What kind of countries?
Yeah, well, so there are vehicles in Taiwan, there are vehicles in Australia, there are vehicles in the Caribbean, everywhere, and we're starting to see a tremendous amount of pull as people understand what the art of the possible is. There's a lot of pull that is happening that people just want that activity to continue.
Donald, can I jump in on that?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so first thing I think we need to do is get Allie to come back to Canada. That would be a good start for us. I think we need her back here. But I think that there's a couple of things. The Deputy Prime Minister today talked about the green transition. And I think when we think about the ocean, if we don't have ocean health, we don't have health in this world. So if you are interested in making an impact on the world and want to get into a sector that will be a game changer, the ocean sector is that place to do it. And so I think about this from the perspective of just the young people coming along. And I think I'm really encouraged by the fact that so many people are taking up the mantle of climate change. And I think the ocean is a place where people are going to recognize if we can fix the oceans, if we can get healthy oceans, there will be life continuing, but also that it is a place where they can make a really large impact on the planet.
Allie, we talk about the cruise industry sometimes and what they were doing maybe before COVID and had to back off with different propulsion systems. I hadn't thought about the hotels and shore stuff. I'm not sure, certainly in our area, we haven't seen the tourism industry turn to what kind of technologies can I use. Are you seeing that, or is this really still a big uphill fight to say, I mean, everybody wants to use less soap and towels, that's easy. But the real conservation of how do I keep my shoreline, how do I keep my dunes? What are you seeing from industry?
Yeah, from the industry perspective, absolutely. I mean, we started back in 2017, and I can definitely say the conversations we had then really started at how does sustainability and tourism even go together. And now we're really, that's definitely coupled. People understand what sustainable tourism is and why it's really necessary for their businesses. So I think from a destination level, we're seeing a lot of development actually going into the sustainable tourism space. So no new tourism products or services are going to be developed in areas without a sustainable tourism plan from a destination level, which is great. But at the same time, private sector needs to know that's coming, especially with all the carbon taxes and everything that's coming through. So from the private sector, we're also seeing a lot of companies wanting to just start by measuring their carbon footprint. They know that they're doing something bad. They just need that kind of benchmark to start, which is really where we're hopping in just to show them, this is where your biggest impacts are coming from. And now actually, even that we've seen in the last 4 years that the sustainable alternatives are becoming cost effective. So we see a lot of companies switching, like river cruise companies, switching from normal fuel to biofuels and then slowly trying to get to electrification. Of course, more infrastructure needs to be there for that, but they're becoming cost effective. So we're seeing those switches a lot, especially also with water purifying, so they don't have to have so many plastic water bottles on board and that those sort of technologies. Absolutely.
Interesting. So from a Canadian point of view, again, autos are big things, aerospace. What does the Canadian government have to do to really spur this? Or do we it's moving, just keep it moving? What's the next step? Kendra, do you have any view of what I should be doing? You might as well tell me now.
So, I think part of it is the investments in innovation overall. So just to pull on one of the comments that Chris made, I think, when 5 years ago, when we thought about digitalization, we thought about fintech, or we thought about media, or we think about cryptocurrency, but when we think about ocean, we think about marine biologists, and we think about very different, more science-based roles. And so this is the digitalization of the ocean economy. And so when we talk about digital skills, for example, from a government perspective, what does that look like for agri-tech and ocean tech? And there's some common skills, right? We're using IoT, we're using robotics, we're using sensors, we're using AI, we're using machine learning. We're seeing all of those technologies. I say if we could get, a half of Kitchener-Waterloo to think ocean as they're developing their companies, what would that mean for the ocean economy? And so I think that's it. And there are big, though, I think, infrastructure investments too. So you look at where the OECD is expecting growth. We don't have, we've got lots of fish processing, but there's a real opportunity to take that to the next level. When you get into offshore wind, are we wave, are we tidal? We're making some investments there, but really thinking about where are some of the big bets in terms of which we're trying with the Blue Economy strategy. Where are the big bets? Where does Canada want to lead? And where do we need to make bigger investments than we've made so far?
Chris?
Yeah. Well, I guess, first of all, I think the ocean economy actually happens right across the region. So it's not just focused on large centers. We do see a lot of activity happening in rural communities and in communities that have traditionally been involved with the ocean. So that's a really good thing. I think the biggest challenge, though, is that there's a workforce transition going on. Automation and uncrewed vessels and AI, all these kinds of things are actually going to reduce the number of people actually at sea. And as I said earlier, improve the opportunity for people to do things from land. But that requires skill change. So I think the biggest single thing the government can continue to do is support reskilling of the workforce and actually help people understand where the opportunities are. I think those are the things that always are a challenge, and that's the biggest challenge we have. We're hiring like crazy, and really continuing to struggle to get all the people that we need to do the work we're trying to do.
Donald?
I would just say continue doing what they're doing in large part with things like Canada's Ocean Supercluster, is putting a focus and an intentional movement around the ocean. And I think that's hugely, hugely valuable. And I think people are awakening to what is the opportunity in this ocean sector because of that. And I think we just need more of that. And I think, to Chris's point, from a government perspective, when you see the fact that you can build an ocean company in any rural community across Canada, you just, we have wonderful companies out of places like Clarenville, Newfoundland, a company called Subsea Image. Small community, they're able to attract talent. You can do this in any community, and I think that's of real value to the Canadian government.
Maybe just another comment just around inclusive workforce. We haven't talked too much about that, but I think there's continuing to push that conversation. And so, the indigenous knowledge and indigenous engagement is so incredibly important to this. They've been stewards of our oceans for thousands of years. So really, how do we make sure that they're an important part of this conversation? Underrepresented groups, to Chris's point, this is rural, this is urban, this is everyone. And so how do we really make sure that we're bringing all of the best thinking to these very complicated, complex challenges?
Ali, you're not here, but if you were here, what would you tell us to do?
Yeah, I think I would resonate with all the panelists, absolutely. Something I've been outside of Canada for a couple of years now, but definitely I'd like to see a little bit more. I think destination planning, I think that's also just because we're really in public sector focus right now, seeing what does the blue ocean economy look like for Canada in the next 10, 20 years? Really, where are the biggest impacts that we can make? And I think that would also kind of bridge this gap with workforce training. So people can really say, if we're getting educated, me as a marine biologist, I didn't really think that there was this kind of public-private sector job for me necessarily. It was really like the academic route. So I think for workforce training, it would be really good to see exactly what kind of jobs can really be waiting for you out there to add to Canada's strategy in the future.
Now, one thing we haven't talked about explicitly is aquaculture. Aquaculture is the best way to produce animal protein with the least amount of carbon footprint, which most people don't understand. Cows they have processes, fish don't. And the feed ratio of a cow is 8 pounds of feed to 1 pound of meat. It's 1-to-1 with salmon. So you get a sense of sustainability. But, everybody's a little bit afraid, etc. But the only way to get there is with aquaculture. But yet, people are uneasy. Kendra, we all deal with that. There's a lot of NIMBY. Yeah, I love it, but it can't be in my backyard. My cottage looks out on that. We live that a lot. Comment on aquaculture because they're part of your supercluster.
They are. So I think, aquaculture struggles with some social license issues. So what you've just said, I think, is not necessarily well understood. When you get into the conversation around being on land versus at sea, if you get into the conversation around what are the impacts and the worries around the impacts at sea, I think that Canada, and we have different views across the country as well in terms of our views on aquaculture. And so, but I think, internationally, aquaculture is a tremendous growth area. There's lots of technology solutions to be able to bring to the aquaculture industry to continue to reduce its impact and maximize. What someone said, if you think about aquaculture, it's agriculture 50 years ago. We have a lot to learn still, and Canada can play a key role in terms of being able to build aquatech. So right now we are sort of a space. We provide space. We've got lots of international companies that are using our space, but I think we have a lot more opportunity to bring some really interesting technology solutions. We have one project, for example, in Newfoundland that is looking at real-time analytics. So they are working with subsea imaging in terms of precision cameras, as well as an Oversea, which is a fish tracking company, to really get down to the individual fish, again, to be able to maximize output and minimize impact. And if that is successful, they will take that model of real-time analytics and monitoring around the world to aquaculture.
Yeah, so just one of the things that we did as we were developing a strategy for, the ocean activity is we went and took a trip to Norway and just looked at what they were doing. And there were two things I learned from that trip that I thought were very, very interesting. The first was to the point you were originally making, which was that the issue between a cow and a fish is gravity.
Right.
At the end of the day, the cow has to overcome gravity and the fish can float. And so the buoyancy actually causes them to need less energy to actually grow. And so, that's such a simple answer that it's kind of interesting to know. And then the second thing was the Norwegians actually see the ocean as a huge opportunity for them. They've already taken great advantage of it, but they continue to see it as a huge opportunity. And in fact, when you scope what they're trying to do with their aquaculture industry, it would actually make the oil sands in Alberta look small. So it could outpace the development of that scale of oil and gas. So that's the scale of the opportunity. And I think, back to your question about the government, I think what the government has to do is understand the opportunity and help the opportunity be implemented. Because I do think that it's an opportunity that's almost beyond our imagination today.
I would I'll come at it from a startup perspective, but what we see is probably 1 in 5 of the companies that come to us and apply to us are looking at aquaculture because it is such a big opportunity. One of the companies that we had, a company called Blue Lion Labs, is out of Kitchener-Waterloo doing aquaculture and solving problems in aquaculture. So it tells you that you can solve problems in the ocean sector across this country. But I just see a massive, massive opportunity with aquaculture from a startup perspective and then a scale-up perspective for this country.
Ali, do you see a conflict between tourism and aquaculture?
Not necessarily. I think they can actually really work well together. I think personally I'd love to see more innovation in the aquaculture feed sector, absolutely, and with water eutrophication and everything that goes on. But I think that the tourism sector is really reliant on aquaculture as well. For a lot of the hotel industry that uses it. So I think the more innovation that's put there, that the tourism industry would really benefit from that.
Right. And it's interesting because on inclusivity, where we see the indigenous groups really doing the most, is in aquaculture. They really do see that as an opportunity and needing support and seeing that kind of growth. So, Kendra, sorry. The offshore decarbonization, being very active, looking at how they can be more effective, take people off the water, etc. Again, an industry that everybody kind of gets a little antsy about, but yet probably one of the industries, at least on our shore, making the most investments on decarbonizing, de-risking, getting safety back. You want to just comment a bit there, because I think it's worth seeing that the effort is almost massive.
Yeah, absolutely. So they are absolutely big investors in clean technology. In fact, one of the reasons I flew to Toronto at 5 a.m. this morning was because I was having a dinner last night talking about this very topic and just the passion around making sure. So Canada produces, really clean oil. And so as you think about the future, and not to get into all of it because we only have a few minutes left, but we are looking at the energy mix. Oil will continue to be part of the energy mix for decades to come. And so these companies are making some really big investments in being able to do that as efficiently as possible. A couple of the things that we see in the supercluster specifically, one is just around remote work. So being able to, again, reduce the number of folks that are out on the platforms. Norway, for example, has a almost completely autonomous platform. And then the other one that we've got is a big project around digital twin. So being able to replicate an offshore platform to make better decisions, more predictive decisions around maintenance, better decisions around, pipeline inspections, et cetera, being able to do all that from shore. And so they see that as a really big, it is around reducing costs and being more efficient, but it is also around better decision making and being able to have a more sustainable.
Yeah, and just as you say, offshore oil off our coast is some of the cleanest oil in the world. Just to put that in context, that again, we often don't think of the offshore as possibility. You're in the energy field, or have been, sorry. So on energy, what else is going to help us generate more fuel?
Well, I guess first of all, I think the ocean has always been a big source of energy for us in various different ways. But more and more it's becoming an actual source of energy as it relates to both wind power and wave power and so on. And so, again, I think all of these industries are in their relative early stages. And so the more we can do to actually continue to develop in those areas. So for instance, one of the things you talked about the Creative Destruction Lab earlier. Well, one of the companies that's entered the Creative Destruction Lab this time is a wave energy company. And they already have a large-scale wave unit that they're in the process of testing. And so, but it's a big facility. Their pilot plant is 28 tons, 20 meters long and 28 tons. So everything in the ocean is large. And so when you think about it in those terms, number one, the opportunity is large, but so is the challenge, and therefore a lot of innovation and a lot of tech needs to be applied. But I think the ocean is going to continue to be a major source of energy for us for a long time. And ultimately, I also think that we're going to learn better and better over time as we continue to apply the techniques and technology to actually make it happen.
Don, have you seen much there? I'm not sure we have, but
yeah, we certainly had a lot of applications in that space. We accepted a couple of companies who are doing some renewable energy projects, and Creative Destruction Lab is pretty focused on that. One thing just on what Kendra was talking about with respect to the large oil and gas companies, I think one of the really great things that will come out of that is it will make it safer to be at sea. And that it's going to cross over not just the oil rigs, but it will cross over to ships and seafarers. If we can get 3D imaging, digital twinning going, it will have a massive impact on the safety and lives of seafarers.
So we have 3 minutes left. I'm going to start giving each a conclusion. We'll start with Ailey because she was the last to begin. But I will repeat again, certainly from our perspective, what we see is if you want to bring sustainability and economic development, it has to go through technology. And we have seen a massive increase, in fact, the thinking, et cetera, at least here in Canada and in a few other countries. So I remind you that this is not Peggy's Cove and beaches. This is real high-tech, high qualifications. It's a much more tech-intensive than that. Ailey, final comments over to you.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to quickly touch on how ocean tourism role really bridges the gap between with economic growth. So I think more and more we as a society are really starting to look past the false notion of conservation, that it undercuts growth and that both cannot coexist. And this is something I'm really glad to see. I think for too long, conservation has really been taking the backseat in industries like tourism. But now we're really seeing the consequences of how unsustainable growth can harm destinations in places like the Philippines and Thailand and many others, unfortunately. So I really think the lack of regard for the marine environment made destinations not only less profitable, but also forced long-term closures, which impacted livelihoods and local economies, not to mention some irreversible environmental damage. So I'd really just like to end with a quote that destinations ultimately lose their profitability when they lose their beauty.
Excellent. Donald, we're going reverse order here.
Okay, yeah. So
Whoops, wake up.
I don't want to get to. I like how you always started with Kendra, but I don't want to get too evangelical about this. But what I would say is we are picking up steam here in Canada in the ocean sector. There is a lot of momentum happening. We need more time to get this sector to where all of us want to see it, where it's generating a lot of revenue for this country. What I have seen in this project from a momentum perspective is we've run a couple of these projects, the sub-projects that I talked about at the beginning, a couple of times now, and the increase in applicants, the increase in the caliber of applicants to our projects is really, really staggering, and we're very, very encouraged by what we're seeing.
30 seconds, Chris.
Okay, well, I think two things. So first of all, the application of technology is what is happening in the ocean, and that's where the opportunity is. Whether it's data, robotics, or automation, those are all the things that are happening. And number two, there's a tremendous opportunity to invest. And I think that that's something that's not well understood, but there is a tremendous opportunity to invest.
Said as a true investor. Kendra.
Yeah, so, the ocean opportunity for Canada is one of the most significant, I think, economic opportunities of our time. And, it's key to our path to economic recovery, but we absolutely have to get it right for the health of our planet. So this is a global conversation, and Canada really has the opportunity to step up and lead, which is incredibly exciting.
And I should say, most of our markets are export by definition. You've got to be a seafaring nation. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, panelists. I appreciate this, and I hope that people have a little bit different view of the oceans as we leave today. Thank you.